I'm Sean Doobie, Principal Technologist North America for Semperis, and the only non-current MVP up here. No? Oh, Guido's off the wagon too. Okay. I was going to say that's why they demoted me to being moderator, but I guess that doesn't work. But I should note, you're at a good technical conference when it takes an MVP to handle the audio, video, and lights system. We have Eric over there. He didn't realize that was going to be part of his job duties, but classic Semperis culture, everybody does whatever they need to do to get the job done. So do you want to say a word about MVPs in general?
There we go. All right. So the conference has a long sort of relationship with the Microsoft MVP program, going back to 2001. Actually, how many people here either heard of or attended the original Directory Experts Conference? Went to the okay.
Look at that.
Cool. Yeah, that's good to see.
Still alive.
So the MVP program at Microsoft was focused on, it was basically a way of recognizing people in the technology community who contributed a lot to the community, either through speaking or writing or helping people out or whatever it was. And that actually fits with the conference model as well, because we're all about building the community around identity protection, encouraging the conversation so that people can network with their peers and learn more about the business that they're really in. So we've had this connection with the MVP program for a while, and interestingly, we've got a bunch of MVPs and former MVPs in Semperis, and that's sort of made this easier to put this kind of panel together. Yeah, so that was my thing about the MVPs.
Okay, great. You'll note that Gil missed the memo on the shoes. Yeah. We got the sort of the Semperis pink going on the shoes here, but allegedly his wife is out shopping for him for a pair of shoes. For that.
I am not looking forward to that.
So oftentimes when I introduce myself, I say I've been doing Microsoft identity as long as Microsoft has been doing identity. And that's certainly true for my colleagues here. And I thought we would start historically by visiting with you on how identity in the Microsoft world, really how it got started and what it was like back in the early days, and what has it evolved into today? And I'll throw it up for any or all of you for the question.
Well, I think I'll start. So back in '95, I was at a company called NetPro. I'd just been sort of acquired by NetPro, and we had built a product for monitoring and managing NDS. Any old NDS people here at all? Yeah. A few, okay.
There are no young
interesting. And as it had happened, I had known Jim Alchin when he was at Banyan. Any Banyan people here? That would be frightening, actually. No way. And I had heard that Microsoft was working on a global directory system along the lines of NDS, and we figured at NetPro that we had a lot of success with our NDS product. We should do the same thing with Microsoft. So I actually got early access to what would become Active Directory in '95, '96. One of the developers gave me a CD that he burned off of his machine that had most of Windows and this directory service on it. That kind of worked. And that's when we started trying to figure out what a management and monitoring product would actually look like for Active Directory back in '96 at that point. And the environment that Active Directory, so you think about this, they were actually burning code in '95, which means the concept and the requirements were really sort of '93, '94 leading into this. And the environment in that time is entirely different from what we have today. I mean, in that era, everybody was wondering, would Microsoft survive in the corporate data center? Because at that point there was, maybe a SQL Server, but Novell was dominating the corporate network as far as microcomputer-based servers were concerned. And the idea that Microsoft was almost a bit player in the corporate data center. owned the desktop for sure, but didn't own the server environment at all. Microsoft made, I think, a couple of brilliant moves with respect to the way they integrated Active Directory into Windows, because they made it almost impossible not to deploy Active Directory as you were upgrading your Windows server. And that drove the adoption of the whole concept of centralized authentication and a global directory server into everybody's network, and over time sort of axed out Novell. Which is an amazing move. I don't know who came up with that idea, but it was from a market perspective, that was a brilliant move.
Let's add to that. Let's add to the situation of, I mean, we didn't have too many hands now of people that used NDS back then, but I think there was one huge difference in the approach to the directory services that Novell had versus the path that Microsoft took. It was hard to integrate applications with Novell because you had to grant all sorts of permissions for each application to get it to work. Microsoft took the different route, and basically it was easy for any application to consume directory services, you know, and of course domain join and all of that helped get single sign-on going. But it's the ease of utilization, a service that can scale and make it into the enterprise, that got it to the position that it is. And that's because it was very open, you know, open from a readability perspective, not necessarily least privileged, but, you know, give them what most people need to do their job, which back then, with the attack surface that we had back then, was all okay-ish, yeah? Most companies didn't necessarily take much time to downgrade that level of readability in the directory, because again, that would have caused some other, or could have caused some other challenges. But that was, I think, the key, or one key of the success from Microsoft's ease of integration on applications, which evolved into, you know, world domination.
Well, and I think that's exactly it. And the application was Exchange. Everybody wanted Exchange. And of course, in here, as a bunch of identity people, we thought everybody wanted AD. It's on. But as the fellow sitting next to me that I interviewed at a DEC conference when I was a technology journalist said, and I have quoted him ever since, nobody cares about identity except identity people. For everybody else, it's just a road bump, a speed bump in getting to what they need to get to. So people adopted Active Directory because they wanted Exchange. I would note that's the same, Microsoft used the same playbook for Azure Active Directory. Nobody wanted Azure Active Directory. Everybody wanted Office 365. Guess what? You got a tenant when you got Office 365. And we all went through this phase where people were going, what? I got what? A tenant? Oh, you know. Now we all pretty well recognize it, but it's the same thing.
So one of the biggest things that's changed since then to now is the threat model that organizations are dealing with. If you look at what the threat model was back then, it was all of the machines are owned by IT. The network is owned by IT. All of the networking devices is owned by IT. The people go into a building through a door, maybe by going past a guard. And that was the environment that Active Directory had to serve at that point. Sometimes they would have a VPN or something like that, but fundamentally, IT controlled the entire environment. Clearly, that has changed. Active Directory was brilliantly designed for that environment. And when you think about it, we've got Active Directory hasn't changed fundamentally in probably, 10 years? Something like that, something along the lines of 10 years. And there are companies right now that are still serving 1 billion authentications a day using 20-plus-year-old technology reliably. No, it actually got to the point where people didn't even know Active Directory was really a thing. They knew kind of that they would log on in the morning, but that's all they knew about. It just worked all the time. And there's been a drastic change in the way companies dealt with their Active Directory over that period of time. Everybody's, I'm sure, seen the guys who deployed Active Directory originally in an organization sort of moved up the food chain, they've retired, they've gone off to do other things, and all of that expertise that came along with deploying Active Directory sort of disappeared. It's gone off to do something else. There was a period of time starting probably about 10, 15 years ago that most organizations had lost their Active Directory expertise and they were farming it out to external companies to manage for them. And that was okay because the threat model was entirely different. That's changed in the last 10, 15 years. And now all of a sudden Active Directory is being tasked with protecting on-prem resources from essentially the entire internet when you think about it, because our networks are now connected to everything. People access the network from home, they access it from when they're on the road. Everything is open, and Active Directory is, being the thing that does the authentication and authorization. It's now the target, and it was never ever designed to do that.
And I mean, I'll just say relative to that, I think if you look at cybersecurity is like the hot thing these days in colleges and whatnot, but they do a dismal job of teaching identity and Active Directory. And to that point of that lost knowledge, you get all these very intelligent people coming out of school who just don't understand identity, and makes it much harder to secure. So,
Yeah, a large amount of what I do out on the road is education, because if there's, I'll ask who's close to AD and the team. They're the ones that are scared out of their pants because they know what it takes to recover Active Directory from a cyber attack. But middle-level management or high-level management, and often the security team, doesn't realize some of the complexities that they're facing. So, yeah, it's important to continue educating. I'm always joke that, you can always tell who the AD administrator is because he's the one in the corner of the conference room with a beard and his arms crossed, looking, looking with that "Say you kids get off my lawn" look, because he understands what all's happening, and everybody else just thinks he's part of the woodwork.
What would be interesting here from the attendees to understand is how many are actually running their own AD or have it outsourced, have a different company take care of essentially your crown jewels. So hands up for the outsourcers. Yeah, who's outsourcing their systems to? Okay, not too many hands. I'm actually proud of that because it's good to keep it on your side, but I've seen plenty of companies work down that way and actually also take it back inside. Yeah.
They wouldn't be at this conference if they had outsourced.
No, somehow, yeah. It's,
Self-selecting group. So I have another self-selecting question. How many of you have hybrid environments? Okay, just checking.
Just to be sure.
Just checking.
Is there an option? Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things as we look at where identity is evolving around Microsoft identity, and it's the elephant in the room, is how Microsoft has, as we all know, said, okay, we're going to the cloud now. And basically, more or less, put on-premises in its rearview mirror, leaving folks like Semperis and other organizations and other communities to keep gluing it together. Do you have any thoughts on the state of that and how well it's being handled?
Actually, I think that's a question I'd like to open up to the group here. Do you have any? What's your sense of this move to the cloud? Are you going to move everything to the cloud? Or are you going to keep something on-prem? And if so, how are you going to manage those resources as far as authentication and authorization is concerned? Yeah, please.
All right, Sonny here from Nigeria. I think if we look back to the congressional hearing at the aftermath of the SolarWinds attack, right? The CrowdStrike guy actually skinned Microsoft in front of the Congress, and Microsoft basically they have no response to that particular question which you just raised now, which George Courts also raised to them. you are causing a lot of problems with this legacy, authentication protocol, and you are asking everybody to move to the cloud. It's not going to work. All right, everybody's not going to go to the cloud. It's not going to work. So what happened now is that the mess, quote unquote, at least I can talk now because the Microsoft guy's not here. Okay, the mess, quote unquote, that the authentication issue of Microsoft has left behind is left for folks like Semperis and other, vendors, which we know, like I think what's the name now? Silverfort, Preempt, which is now part of CrowdStrike, to fix. Okay, so I think it's opened up an opportunity for other vendors that are not as big as Microsoft to also come in now and solve physical problem like we have seen solved. For instance, Microsoft will tell you that, look, everything has to be in the cloud, else they cannot defend you. I just asked that question about MFA. Microsoft talked about MFA adoption. What happened to on-premise application? And I was glad the VP said, sorry, we have no idea. You have to come to the cloud. But you have resources on-premise. And this is where other solutions providers can provide security for the legacy authentication, like NTLM. Because with NTLM, you are able to bypass those MFA with ease. So legacy authentication protocols that are bringing this problem can only be resolved with vendors such as Semperis or others who are not Microsoft. That way, until they figure out how to solve that problem, if they will ever solve it, then those guys who still have their resources on premise will have some kind of breather. Depending on Microsoft alone, they will end up in the news quickly than they ever imagine.
I maybe just want to add to that. First of all, thanks for that comment. I think we need to differentiate between responsibilities of which state of technology a company is in, because especially applications that have not been updated, servers. I see it all over the place with companies. Who's in the factory in the manufacturing business? Has some factories somewhere. Yeah. You guys are going to struggle to get operating systems to the latest levels because of some applications managing some billion-dollar robot or whatever they cost, is still running XP or whatnot, So, and of course, for ease of use, it's integrated into your identity system. Well, who wants to manage local accounts, And it's not isolated well either, but that is the attack surface to go after, So the real world is true, makes it harder to be, all cloud or even just on the newest operating system version, and utilizing cool, good technology that Microsoft even did add to Active Directory. Protected Users Group was added pretty much 10 years ago. We see it so often not used at all, and that would prevent NTLM being used as an authentication protocol for the accounts that are in that group. Should be your tier 0 accounts, like the domain admins and whatnot, not your everyday user, but the privileged accounts, because you might need NTLM for the apps, because otherwise the app cannot authenticate the user and whatnot. So those are things where technology might have evolved and be more, secure already, but you can't keep up with it. And that is where third-party tools might be able to help you reduce that risk. But that's also always been a, let's say, I would almost say deliberate gap in terms of functionality here and there that Microsoft left open for vendors to take care of. More so in the on-prem world than, of course, in the cloud world. But so it's we're obviously not doing a blame show here. Microsoft bad? No, not at all. It's just an understanding of the history that many can't actually keep up with the change of technology and do remain at risk. And you still need to manage that risk.
Yes. So back to Sean's initial questions about moving to the cloud. I think as Sean pointed out, exchange. I mean, as the reliance on less reliance on premises exchange happens, there will be an increase in the cloud adoption. And then back to your point and on Sunday's point, the legacy will keep Active Directory aboard. When that goes away, then I think there'll be a full adoption of cloud. That's the way I see it. But not until then.
I have a question for everybody, right? So Marty from CDW.
Marty, hang on a second.
Wait a minute, Marty. So how many of you are on Office 365 for email? How many are running on-prem Exchange?
Still, you mean?
Still, yeah. Not in hybrid mode, just purely on-prem Exchange.
Oh, no.
2, 3? So Microsoft forced everybody's hand, right? It was kind of you are going to Office 365 as a part of your EA renewal, which I don't think is a bad thing, right? We are a big, giant $24 billion conglomerate. And back to the whole cloud conversation, we're a cloud-first company. If we onboard any new technology, like we're going to Workday because it's cloud-first, right? But our DR is literally our data center. Because of all the third-party applications, all the authentication requirements, and protecting our crown jewels, Active Directory, we made an internal decision and looked at it and said, cloud is great. It's very usable. Things are frictionless for our population. But at the end of the day, our DR, because of all the outages from those partners that have occurred the last few years, it's going to be in our data center because we control all of it, right? We control the authentication authorization. And more and more organizations and customers we talk to, I'm seeing kind of go back to that model, and they're saying, you know what, I'm going to do cloud for the same cost or less because of Office 365 and Azure AD being available and all the integrations. But at the end of the day, I'm still going to run DR back into my data center, especially the bigger tech companies.
I was just going to say, relative to, I know a lot of times we talk about technology, but you know, when Alex was talking earlier, there's the whole people aspect and right, how we can't program people. But I think sometimes it's interesting where, right, hopefully we all sort of know better about identity and identity security, but it's still tough, right? And you know, Guido's talking about tier 0. Back in the 2010s, I managed a Active Directory team, and when we decided to roll out PAW, like I was nobody's friend. And you know, it's like, right, like, because they like browsing from a domain controller, and we know a lot better now, but yeah.
How else do you look up how to do something when you're trying to?
No, and I think it's, yeah, it's interesting going to a lot of security conferences that are not Microsoft oriented and seeing still today, and it gets back to that education piece, that people still are making the same mistakes that we made 20 years ago, right, when we didn't know any better. So I'm not sure how to sort of solve that aside from continuing to try to preach the change, but yeah.
Brian.
So another trend that I have seen over the years is a company adopting a cloud-first mentality and then using tools to forklift their legacy applications as virtual machines in the cloud to check the box, we're a cloud-first company. So you still have LDAP and domain controllers and LDAP applications running across the Microsoft backbone. So you're still going to need, even though on-prem has shifted into somebody else's data center, it's still on-prem, and you still are going to have to use those legacy protective applications like Semperis and some other tools that are out there to do your DR, to do your detection. So there's a disconnect between what is cloud first. And in some companies, I think cloud first is let's get it in the cloud so we can check the box. There are some protections and there are some benefits to moving some of that stuff from on-prem to the cloud. But you're still carrying legacy into the new age, and you're going to perpetuate that.
Brian used to run an extremely large Active Directory for us, so he knows what he's talking about in that realm.
So I don't think we can categorize that as a cloud migration. I think lift and shift situations, basically, you are just moving your challenges from on-prem to cloud. And even in some situation, it can become even worse in managing in cloud environment. So I won't categorize that a cloud migration.
Let me ask a question. How many of you, a multi-part question, how many of you, let's start with the easy one. How many of you would say that your strategy is quote, cloud first, quote. Bunch of hands nodding, most people in the room, okay. How many of you think that you'll be entirely off of Active Directory, shut down domain controllers? I'll throw this out there because I know what the answer will be in 2 years. We have one. We have a hand. Okay. Of course, here's Yubico. Okay.
So, like your mainframe, it used to be gone by now, but it's still continuing, and you don't know until when.
Well, you could handle it. You could handle Active Directory. Getting rid of Active Directory similar to the mainframe, but putting all the costs of the applications that's still needed. That's how mainframes were sort of gotten rid of through the application owner that needed that. Yeah, and that's just one of those things that technically works in the on-prem world as well, but it's just not always the path that everybody wants to take. Think of again the topic of factories. Not every factory wants to be connected to the cloud. Yeah, you want to be offline. You want to be isolated. So that's where I still see the need for on-prem technology for years to come. Yeah, I'm not saying that smart factories aren't a thing. They are. Yeah, there's many IoT devices added to factories, sensors of all sorts of stuff, which are adding to the vulnerability, to the attack surface of factories as well, especially those combined with some legacy systems on the same network, not nicely isolated. Bad idea, yeah, so don't do that. But but some will actually, well, I can't say never have that cloud approach in a factory, but I'm from Germany, yeah, and there's German companies, or European, I guess, in general, they're even more hesitant to move everything into something that they don't control. Yeah.
So we have about 7 minutes left. I'm determined to end this one on time, but this is an opportunity to talk a little bit about Storm 558. I know we had wanted to sort of air that, and maybe this is a chance for you get some opinions out there. Eric, I think you had some comments that you wanted to make about that.
Well, I did, but I feel like Alex actually covered a lot of it. But I mean, I think with what happened, and there was that sort of whiz article that came out after, and some back and forth there. And I mean, I think just as much as we struggle understanding, well, some folks with Kerberos and all the different attack methods, like I think it still shows the immaturity in the industry. In understanding, OpenID Connect and OAuth and all that, and where you just see a lot of stuff. You'd go look on Twitter or X or whatever it's called, or Mastodon, where you just all the sort of pontificating, and really you look at it and you're like, well, unless you really understand it, right? There's all this. We just have a lot of learning to still do out there from a modern authentication perspective.
I have a question for the group here. Has that compromise changed anybody's view of using the cloud in general, or had any bearing on your migration to the cloud? Raise your hand if not at all. Well, is that a change actually?
I was just going to say something, as we are migrating things into the cloud and we're trying to be cloud first, but something that I'm not sure leadership realizes necessarily is that, we're changing IDP to be a SaaS version IDP. Well, when they take a 4-hour outage and anything associated with authentication is like, well, there's nothing we can do about it. It's the vendor, kind of thing. That really kind of scares, you're putting a lot of trust in them. And if there is a big outage, I think if Microsoft goes, Azure goes down for some reason, I think a lot of people might second guess, their adoption strategy on some of that. Like, what's the backup of that?
That's a good point.
There's a backup authentication service in Azure, yeah. So that's a feature.
There is.
Yeah, I know. Actually, are people aware of that? So, are you aware that Microsoft has, of course? I mean, this is a risk scenario that Azure authentication potentially for region, or I don't know how it would work for just a tenant, but probably more region isn't available. There's a backup authentication service that'll pop up and allow your users to continue to work but no changes are able. It's like read only. Yeah. So I think that's not a bad thing to know about. Yeah. And
Yeah.
if there is some, I would take out something takes down that primary authentication capability. You have the system I would think switches automatically to that backup system, and it's just you cannot do any changes in your tenant. So that's a powerful. Sounds like BDC to me.
I mean, it is on by default, but like, most things, there is that security versus usability risk with it. So
There's one other aspect of cloud migration that I was curious about, and I've heard this complaint from a bunch of different companies, is that organizations, looking ahead, decided they were going to go cloud first and started this migration project to move all their assets into the cloud and adopt new applications only in the cloud first and bring something on-prem only if there was nothing comparable available. And part of the justification was because of the economies of scale that a cloud vendor like Microsoft or Salesforce has, all of this would actually end up being cheaper. And I can tell by some of the snickers here that maybe that's not the case, but I've heard this in a lot of cases that the cost of running the applications in the cloud is a bit of a surprise, especially if you're using something like, I don't know, Splunk to, the cost associated with Splunk is ridiculous. Has anybody else run into this situation where the cost of moving everything to the cloud is actually putting the brakes on your migration? Yeah, a couple of people. So that's another driver that's going to tend to keep resources on-prem. Some resources aren't going to migrate to the cloud just because of the cost aspect of it.
They're already we've all run into this where they say, look, my infrastructure is fully depreciated. Why should I, I've paid the capital expenditures. Why should I spend more at this time? So we are at the end of the session time. So we have enough time for lunch. Lunch is downstairs. If you go back to the entrance, there's a set of stairs on the 5th floor, and there's a big conference room down there, and lunch is set up.